Canada's Privacy Commissioner says the law governing Statistics Canada should be changed to avoid a repeat of last year's controversial plan to harvest the personal banking data of 500,000 Canadians. Now, that plan never went ahead, but Danielle Therrien says it raised all sorts of alarm bells. That's just part of the Privacy Commissioner's annual report. He's also calling for Canada's privacy laws, both in the public and private sectors, to be updated. He says Canada's gone from being a leader to now trailing other countries with outdated laws and a privacy commissioner with few powers. Let's talk about that. Canada's Privacy Commissioner Danielle Therrien joins me now in our studio to discuss his annual report. Good to see you.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. I want to get to some of the wider recommendations in a moment, but let's start with the Statistics Canada story and that abandoned attempt to harvest Canadians' banking data. You say no laws were broken, largely because the agency cancelled its pilot project. A lot of Canadians were outraged at StatsCan over this. Why were those concerns justified?
So the projects in question, one of them at least, involved banking information, as you say. The purpose of Statistics Canada, I think, was correct. They wanted to build credible statistics to inform government programs. But what was incorrect and what outraged Canadians, I think, is the level of detail, the intrusiveness of the information being collected, particularly line by line bank records where each and every transaction and thing bought by an individual would be known to government in order to feed a statistical analytical machine. So again, the purpose was very adequate, but what we found was excessive was the level of detail in terms of the collection, and that's also what alarmed Canadians.
So there is, you're suggesting there is a way to do that. There is a way for StatsCan to do what it wanted to do, but not the way they tried to do it.
Yes,
how could they do it and satisfy your concerns?
Well, it's not so easy. So okay. to give credit to Statistics Canada, they defended their ways early on, but they agreed with us after some discussion that they could get to where they wanted to, i.e. produce credible statistical information for the government without collecting that much information. How we're going to do that is why we're going to work in conjunction with them, in concert with them, to help them do that. We have not figured out exactly how to do that, but we are hopeful, I'm confident that it will be possible to do that without collecting as much information.
Right, so in your conversations with them, they made it clear they're going to still try to go down this road, but it sounds like they're going to do it in lockstep with you.
Yes, and they're in agreement that they will work with us to try to minimize the data collected while achieving their goal.
You say that Canada's laws, both in private and public sector, on privacy are outdated. How do they need to be brought up to date?
In a number of ways. One we've seen with the scandals of the recent years, particularly Cambridge Analytica, that there's a close relationship between the protection of privacy and the protection of other fundamental rights. For instance, democratic rights, the right to choose the person you'll vote without being influenced by micro-targeting that is the result of analytical work by companies. So the first step is to recognize that privacy is a human right, as opposed to simply being a set of technical rules like consent. You may consent to certain things, with the result being that your right to privacy, your right to democracy is infringed. And the law should provide that regardless of consent in some circumstances, your right will be violated. Point one. Point two, we should put an end to self-regulation. The law that we have dates from around the year 2000, before Facebook was created. The internet was not what it is today. Now we know that self-regulation does not work to protect individuals, Canadians. We need the state, we need the government to pass laws to protect citizens. Citizens, at the end of the day, want to be able to use digital technologies without fear that they are being the subject of surveillance. And the consent regime that we have does not sufficiently protect them. We need laws that actually protect people from surveillance.
So laws. So how do you do that? So it's a question of making this a government responsibility. But then what? Who would be targeted by new laws if it's not about self-regulation? So who are you regulating?
There are two laws. We would continue to have two laws, I think. One law for the private sector, one law for the public sector. And there would be, rather, for the private sector, for instance, the current law is often simply, it is like an industry code of conduct where companies are, suggestions are made to companies as to how to protect privacy. That's no longer good enough in 2019. The privacy protection should take the form of rights that are enforceable in court before the privacy commissioner, so that we don't face a situation, for instance, as we were facing with Facebook, where we make a recommendation to Facebook to change its practices, and they say, sorry, we don't think that's necessary, we won't do it. So we're no longer in the world of suggesting good practices to companies. Yeah. We should be in the world of there are laws, and you need to follow laws.
The government announced a digital rights charter this past spring. Does that do anything to deal with your concerns around privacy?
It's a step in the right direction. I think it's a document that's probably in evolution. It is not a complete plan to reform privacy laws. There are still a lot of gaps in that document. Among other gaps, definition of powers for our office. That document seems hesitant to give us the powers that we need.
What power do you want?
We need the authority to make orders against companies, so that we don't just make recommendations to Facebook. We can order them to change their practices when we are of the view that they are in violation of the law. But that's not quite sufficient. We also need the authority to impose fines, because the profits are so important for companies that unless there are fines that create an incentive for them to comply with the law, they won't.
Right, you raised a case. I mean, so how would you see that case unfolding with the powers you believe you need? So the government suggests Facebook change its privacy standards. Facebook says, yeah, we don't think we want to do that. You get involved and say, do it or else there are consequences. How do you see those consequences?
Normally, if we have these powers, and the experience of our colleagues in other countries is such, at the end of our investigation with Facebook, rather than Facebook saying, no, we're not interested, it would likely have resulted in, okay, we don't want to be the subject of a large fine, for instance, so we will change our practice. If a company still does not agree with this, if we impose fines, well, that's at least a sanction that makes it more likely for them to comply with the law. The point of these powers is to ensure that Canadians have their rights respected as quickly and efficiently as possible. The current system clearly doesn't achieve that, and if you don't give my office the authority to impose fines and leave that to the courts, you delay the proceedings and you delay the enjoyment of rights by Canadians.
Fair enough. I want to finish with a bit of a double-barreled question. You talked about today about a little bit about Canada falling behind compared to other countries. Yes. In terms of privacy protections. This is a big day for trade deals. We just look like we're concluding the new NAFTA, as it were. Could the lack of privacy protections in this country become an issue as we go down the road of these trade deals with countries that may have better privacy protections?
Well, that raises the issue of the adequacy status of Canada's laws under Europe's regulation. Currently, Canada's laws have been found to be adequate under EU law. That assessment will need to be made again by European authorities in 2020. If our laws are found not to be adequate, according to the European Commission, that will create obstacles. It will not make impossible, but it will create obstacles to trade between Europe and Canada, and that the data of European citizens will not flow as freely to Canada,
Right.
therefore Canadian companies, rather than the situation we have now where our laws have been found adequate. That's a big deal.
So another incentive to step up privacy protections.
Absolutely, absolutely.
If we plan to do business around the world.
Yes.
Daniel Therrien, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
Welcome.